We are doing tonight Parshas VaYetzei. The topic, slightly whimsical, is Jacob loves Rachel, and we are going to learn about that as well as some other related aspects of the dramatic events in this week's Torah reading. Of course, we're using our friend for the year, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, and let's start from near the beginning of the Sedra. Uh, if you're with me in the Art Scroll Chumash, then you will find it on page 144 is the beginning of our Parsha. It is Bereshis chapter 28, starting with verses 10, etc. VaYetzei Yaakov mi Beersheva v'yelech Charana. Yaakov departed, he left Beersheva, and he went towards Haran. And the Torah says immediately, Vayifga b'makom. That is to say, rather than telling us about the is reaching his destination, we have an extended and important, it's not really a detour because he was en route, but Vayifga b'makom, he encountered the place. Doesn't say which place. We will learn, of course, that the place he encountered is the fateful location where his father Yitzchak was nearly sacrificed. This is going to be, this was designated as Har HaMoriah by Abraham, and of course it will be the Temple Mount in the future. But we're not going to analyze the dream that he experiences in detail, but rather I want to focus on one important aspect which Abarbanel returns to a few times, because in his understanding and his approach, this particular part of the prophetic experience sheds light on everything that happens subsequently in our Sedra. So in the dream, Yaakov beholds angels ascending and descending the ladder, and he beholds also the presence of Hashem. And let's take a look in Pasuk Yud Gimel. V'nei Hashem nitzav Allah. Behold, God is standing over him. Vayomar Ani Hashem Elokei Avraham Avicha v'Elokei Yitzchak. I am the God of your father Abraham, the God of your father, and the God of Isaac. Haaretz, even though really Abraham was his grandfather, Isaac was his father. Abarbanel says the reason is that Hashem wanted to clarify that it is Yaakov who is the legacy of Abraham and Yitzhak. So even though Abraham had a son, Esau, Abraham had a son, Yishmael, Abraham had other sons as well, but it is Yitzchak who is his primary legacy, and it is Yaakov who is the primary legacy in turn of Yitzchak. So that's why he says your father Abraham, as if Yaakov and Abraham have a direct sort of link. But that's just impossible. The land upon you to Beulah I will give to you and your descendants. Now here's the pasuk that is crucial for us. Your progeny will be as numerous. I'm adding the word numerous because that's the connotation of the simile or the metaphor will be as the dust of the earth. Ufaratsta, and you will spread out. Yama v'kedmat safon v'negma. Now, literally, it means towards the sea, towards the beginning, that is to say, the east. So the sea is the Mediterranean Sea, which is to the west. The early part, that which comes first, of course, is the rising of the sun, is the east. Tzafona means the north. V'negba Negev, of course, means what we call today in Israel the Negev, which it derives, Rabbeinu Bechaya says, derives from the word naguv. Naguv or magevet. A magevet is a towel. Naguv means that which is dry, because the Negev is dry. It doesn't rain very much in the Negev. And Negba therefore refers to the south, because in general, the south of the land of Israel, there is little rain. To the north, in Lebanon, in Syria, there's more rain. To the south, in the Sinai Peninsula, there's very little rain. The Negev, very little rain. So in any case, that is south. So Negev is the term for south. So again, Yama v'Kemet Safona v'Negba, the four directions, it means the 4 points of the compass. All the nations of the world will be blessed. So Abarbanel asks, why does the Torah say that Ufaratzta, you Yaakov will spread out all directions? Yaakov is only one person. Of course, it means his descendants, but then the Torah could say, Vaya Zaracha Kafaratz, your descendants will be greatly numerous, Ufaratz, and they will spread out to all directions. The Torah hints here to the idea that somehow Yaakov himself, so just by the way, he doesn't say it by the way, he says it as what part of his interpretation, but it's by the way for us because the primary interpretation I want to link to the rest of the Sedra. But he says a very beautiful comment about why the Torah says as if Yaakov himself was spread out in all those directions. He'll be dispersed. Yaakov himself, he's only one man. One man can travel, but he can't be dispersed himself, and nor are his children dispersed in the sense that Yaakov's 12 sons also they pretty much stay together. Of course, Yosef goes to Mitzrayim before the others, but it's not like they each seek their fortune in a different continent, but like my children have. It's not the case for Yaakov. So it says Abarbanel that it means that even in the future, when your descendants, your distant future descendants will be widely dispersed. They will be scattered throughout the world. They will retain their identity. They will still be known as Yaakov or Yisrael. They will still be identified and they will still regard themselves and still acknowledge their descent and their association with you and your legacy. So your descendants, although they will be dispersed, but their status as descendants of Yaakov will remain a feature of who they are. It will remain core to their identity. And that is actually very remarkable. I don't believe there's anyone from 3,000 years ago, when Yaakov lived actually more than 3,000 years ago, about 3,800 years ago, any one individual about whom it could be said that his descendants can be identified and retain their common identity and their common destiny because of the experiences of their ancestor Yaakov and Yitzchak and Abraham. The fact that we're here in this year tonight, of course, reflects exactly that. I think it's a very beautiful thought. But for our purposes, we're going to move on because the primary means or the primary importance that Abarbanel attaches to that expression, that turn of phrase, is that according in his view, Yaakov realized with this prophecy that his descendants would would symbolically like gain an association with the 4 points of the compass, which means that he foresaw that in hundreds of years' time, his descendants would receive the Torah and they would be in the Sinai Peninsula, meaning in the Sinai wilderness, peninsula on the point, but the wilderness of Sinai, and there Machane Yisrael would be divided into four wings, in which the Shekhinah would be in the middle, that's where the Mishkan, and the 12 tribes, the 12 sons, the descendants of the 12 sons of Yaakov will encamp each one in his own wing. There will be three to the north, three to the east, etc. Three in each direction. Therefore, Yaakov also knew, according to Abarbanel, that this prophecy alluded to the fact that he, Yaakov, would marry four women. The 12 sons would be produced by four women. That's why Abarbanel sees all of that in Ufaratz Yama Venegba Tzafona Venegba. The 4 points of the compass, meaning that he foresaw that he would father 12 sons representing 12 tribes, and they would derive from four wives. This helps to explain, according to Abarbanel, why it is that when Yaakov does marry, and he wants to marry Rachel because he loves Rachel, as the Torah itself says, we find actually rather than foretelling um, a trailer, let's actually learn it ourselves. So we find a few verses later in verse, actually chapter 29, verse 20, it says that actually let's take a look at verse 18, Pasuk Yud Ches on page 150. So Yaakov makes his way to Haran. He rocks up at the well. He meets Rachel there. And again, Abarbanel says that Yaakov had the sense of destiny, the sense that just as his father's bride was encountered at the well, and it was the same well, a generation later, it was the same well, it was the same family, of course, and it was the same town, Haran. And therefore, he felt that when he saw Rachel, who was, it turns out, related to him as the shepherds who were there informed him, and I suppose he recognized in her fine qualities that were appealing to him. In fact, the Torah says explicitly, we don't have to dance around the subject. She was of beautiful appearance, beautiful figure, the Torah says explicitly. So Yaakov said, this is the girl for me. And it says he loved her, even says he kissed her, but we're not going to dwell on that. And the Torah says clearly in Pasuk Yud Zayin, the 17, the Ele Leah Rakos, that she had an older sister, Leah. Leah's eyes were tender. V'Rachel Haisei Fastor V'Fasmare. Rachel was a knockout. Ve'ahav Yaakov is Rachel. It's not surprising, therefore, perhaps. I mean, the Torah almost sort of hints to why. I'm sure her beauty was not the only reason, but again, the Torah does attest to that. V'yahav Yaakov is Rachel. Yaakov loved Rachel. By the way, many of the Meforshim say Leah was also beautiful, but her eyes were exceptionally beautiful. Um, some say she was beautiful, but her eyes were maybe like a weaker part of her appearance. For those who'd like to come on Shabbos, we're going to talk about something in her eyes that shows, and we'll learn a lot more about that in the kiddush after the kiddush. But for our purposes now, we just read that Yaakov loved Rachel, and he proposed to Lavan, "Let me work for you for 7 years." But Rachel bitchaktan, because Lavan said after Yaakov was there for a month, Lavan said, "Why should I exploit the free labor? What would you like to charge for your services?" And Yaakov says, I propose to work 7 years for the hand of your younger daughter Rachel. So Lavan says, okay, you're on. So the Torah goes on to say how Yaakov was busy with his work as a shepherd. V'yavod, look at Pasuk Chaf. V'yavod Yaakov barachel sheva shanim. He worked for Rachel for 7 years. V'yu ve'inav kiyamim achadim. And in his eyes, it was like a few days. Ba'havaso osa. He loved her so much, the time passed very quickly. So many of the Mefarshim wonder, this would seem to be contrary to human nature. Human nature is that if there's something which is very beloved to you, something which is greatly sought, for which a person is longing or pining or awaiting with great excitement and great desire, then the passing of time goes very slowly. And the 7 years would maybe seem like decades because he loves her so much. And the Torah says the opposite. So the Abarbanel and others have said that it passed quickly because of his love for her. He regarded it as a bargain. He thought, I am getting such a valuable, such a precious, such a priceless acquisition, if you can use that term, for 7 years' work. It's well worth it, and I feel as if I'm getting the bargain of the decade. He says, I'll just read you a few words. Kimirov cheshko ba nira lo shelakacha bezol. Because since he was so desirous of her, so it seemed as if he had made a very savvy acquisition, as if he paid only a very minimal price for something of such great value. V'hakoneh bezol yifra b'ain yafeh. One who buys at a bargain price, so he pays for it gladly, he pays for it happily. I remember some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there was a glitch on the British Air website that they were selling first class tickets from London to various long haul destinations for about £200, if I remember, where the real price would be about £5,000 for a round trip first class ticket to those destinations. and it was an error. It was some kind of technical error. I think it was Dan's Deals in New York that actually it's in Cleveland who discovered it and he put it on his website. And I heard about it. I didn't take any action, but there's some people I know who quickly went online and booked a ticket. It was with limited sort of time. You had to fly within certain dates, and they you know. Took themselves off to distant destinations. They did it very quickly because they knew it was a mistake. And I think that British Air certainly took it down within hours. I think they did honor those prices. Perhaps they didn't. I'm not quite sure. But the point is that sometimes when you pay for something and you feel that you're getting an amazing bargain, maybe somehow taking advantage of circumstances or the timing. So when you see that your credit card has been debited, you're delighted because it means you got it. You successfully made that acquisition. Anyway, that's what Abarbanel says. That's why from but with all of that background, it's particularly shocking. I mean, we're not shocked because we know it very well. We've read it so many times before. How, as the Torah says, that Yaakov then said to Lavan, "Okay, my 7 years are up. Malu ki malu yamai, and give me my wife." So Vayasof Lavan in Pasuk Chav Beis in verse 22. Vayasof Lavan is called Sham Makom Vayas Mishte. So Lavan made the party of the decade. It was the wedding, this high society wedding that they talked about for the longest time. He invited, the Torah says, Vayas Mishte, call Anshe Hamakom, all the people, all the townspeople of Vayas Mishte, and he made a great banquet. So Abarbanel says the reason he made such a banquet, and when he marries Rachel, because as we know, he's going to switch Leah for Rachel. That's what's the shocker. Yaakov himself, it seems, was certainly shocked, and yet Lavan was very crafty, and he made a big party to make it a very high profile public spectacle so that Yaakov would be embarrassed the next morning when he finds out that she's got the wrong bride to divorce her or to come to Lavan and demand that he takes her back and gives him Rachel right away. So even though it's true that Yaakov expresses his distress and he says, Lama Misani, why did you deceive me? Why did you defraud me? But at the same time, we don't find that Yaakov says, "This is an outrage. I want my correct wife. You take the wrong one back." He doesn't do that. Partly maybe because, as we just said, Lavan made it difficult for him by having made such a great party. So maybe Yaakov himself would be embarrassed to then, like, almost cast a dark shadow over the whole incident. At the end of the day, he's a newcomer. He's been a not a guest exactly, but he's been a hired hand in the home of Lavan. And even though Yaakov has been cheated, but still it would have been a bit awkward for him to demand the cancellation of the nuptials. But according to Barbanel, there's something further here as well, and that is the dream. Yaakov knew that he's destined to marry 4 women. And of course, he wasn't expecting Leah, but when he found the next morning that she was Leah, he must have felt that this is part of his destiny. That ultimately, again, is not happy with how it came about, but ultimately, this is evidently part of the prophecy that he's going to marry not Rachel, although he will marry Rachel in 7 days later, but he's going to have Leah as well. And of course, as we know, Leah, who is unloved, produces one child and then a second and then a third, to the point that, excuse me, Yaakov probably does begin to love her because, after all, she's the mother of these wonderful children. And then Rachel gets in on the act by introducing Bilhah, her maidservant, and then Leah does the same. And finally, Rachel, as we know, towards the end of the Parsha, she does give birth to Yosef, and in next week to Binyamin. And those are the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Yaakov. But the point is that when Yaakov discovers that he has been exploited, he recognizes that this evidently is part of the divine plan. Now, what is his relationship with Rachel and with Leah? Once he marries Rachel, 7 days later, although he works for a further 7 years for Rachel, but it's like buy now, pay later, because Lavan gives Rachel to him 1 week later. And then for the subsequent seven additional second 7 years, he works for Rachel yet again. And it's interesting, says Abarbanel, that Yaakov doesn't seem to be upset about it. Again, he's not happy about having been defrauded, but he makes the point that when you buy something and you don't get the merchandise until you pay, which is the norm, then you come up with the money because you want that acquisition, you pay and then you receive it. When it's the other way around, when you've already received it and then you've got to pay in arrears, you do that with more reluctance because you become accustomed to making use. I don't want to say a wife is making use of, but I'm just saying in terms of an acquisition, you feel it's yours, and the burden, the shadow that's cast over these monthly payments that you have to make, a person is often a bit resentful towards it. So he says that wasn't the case with Yaakov. Again, his love of Rachel was such that he didn't mind paying for her even a second time. But what is his relationship with Leah? So here, if you take a look at Pasuk Lamed, it says, Ve'avo gam el Rachel, verse 30 on page 152 in the Art Scroll Chumash, Ve'avo gam el Rachel, so he consorted with Rachel as well, Ve'yahav gam es Rachel mi Leah, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. Ve'avod imo od sheva shanim acheros, and he worked for her for 7 more years. Says Abarbanel, usually a man has greater love for his first wife, and Leah was his first wife by 7 days. And his experience with Leah after the first night, and subsequently meant that he would naturally develop a close, intimate devotion and affection for his new wife. Therefore, it's a novelty that even when he married Rachel a week later, that he loved Rachel more than Leah. But Abarban has another question. He says, furthermore, the Torah says that Leah, he didn't like her. I mean, the Torah says he hated her. Many Meforshim say it doesn't mean she was hated, it means she was unloved, or he did love her, but compared to Rachel, she was not loved as much. Abarbanel prefers to take it almost at face value. He says that Yaakov, over time, he got to love Leah, maybe because she was the mother of so many of his sons. But at first, he resented Leah. And we can understand why. Even though his objection and his sort of he remonstrated with his father-in-law about the deception, but of course Leah was an accomplice to the crime. uh, Lavan is uh, the one who's manipulated things, but Leah surely was very well aware that Jacob, her cousin, was working for 7 years for her younger sister. And when Leah chose to impersonate uh, Rachel under the chuppah and had a chuppah actually in those days, and to defraud Yaakov, so of course Yaakov is resentful of what she's done to him, even if she's beautiful and she has many fine qualities, but he's resentful of what she did to him. How can he fully love her? So therefore, he doesn't really love her very much, according to Abarbanel. So why does it say that when he consorted with Rachel, Vayahav gamas Rachel mileah? So he says an interesting thing. It doesn't mean he loved Rachel more than Leah, but he loved Rachel because of Leah. Leah means not he loved her more than, but rather he loved her as a result. He loved Rachel as a result of Leah. He had a basis for comparison. If he only married Rachel, so Rachel is his wife, and he loves her, and she loves him, and that's wonderful. That is a paradigm. Please God, we should all enjoy such a paradigm. But it happens that Yaakov's circumstances were that he had a basis of comparison. And because he had the opportunity to get to know Leah, when he was able to embrace Rachel, then he loved her more as a result of the comparison to Leah. That's how he understands it. And nevertheless, again, Abarbanel says he recognized that part of his destiny was to marry both of them. And of course, this explains why he also agreed to take in Zilpah, Bilhah, and then Zilpah. Abarbanel also asks, it's a strange thing that Leah introduced Zilpah to the happy family. Zilpah was Leah's maidservant. It's not the norm for a woman who's married to a man to introduce or to deliberately uh, dilute her relationship with her husband by introducing another woman. So Sarah did it because Sarah was childless, and so she introduced Hagar. She regretted it, it would appear, but that's what she did. Rachel has done it because Rachel was desperate for children, which wasn't were not forthcoming. So therefore, as a kind of surrogate experience. So again, Bilhah is her maidservant. So Rachel introduced Bilhah. But why did Leah introduce Zilpah? So part of Abarbanel's explanation is that Zilpah was also part of the realization of that prophecy. She didn't have the prophecy, but he suggests that Yaakov would have told them about the dream, and maybe she understood on her own that the four directions, Yamav, Kedma, Tzafon, and Negba, mean that Yaakov is destined to have 12 sons from a total of four wives. Uh, and in this way, Abarbanel explains these events, Yaakov's complex relationship with his two wives, and ultimately with the two maidservants who also became the mothers of his children. But ultimately, as I said at the beginning, Abarbanel understands these events in the context of that original prophetic dream which Yaakov had, in that he was it was revealed to him what his destiny would be. And remember, Hashem said at the end of that dream, I will be with you, I will protect you until you return to this land. And therefore, at the end of our parsha, we can understand why Yaakov felt the time had arrived, although he didn't quite have the 12 sons yet. He had 11 sons, but because Benjamin was only born en route. But when Rachel gave birth to Yosef, so Yaakov sensed that the time to return had arrived. Some say that Rivka, his mother, sent a message to him through Devorah, who was the wet nurse. We learn about her in next week's parsha a little bit, because Rivka had said, I will let you know when it's safe to return. But in any case, Yaakov realized that his extended sojourn in Haran was for the purpose of marrying these four women, bringing into the world the 12 sons, representing who will be the forerunners of the 12 tribes, who in turn will be the progenitors of the Jewish nation that have realized that prophecy of dispersal to the 4 points of the compass. Not that that was necessarily something that was a favorable event. We're talking about the exile and the Churban Abayis, but nevertheless, it clearly is part of the divine plan. And just as Yaakov himself experienced vicissitudes, but ultimately a sense of fulfilling his destiny in accordance with the divine plan, the same is true for the Jewish people collectively, and including all of us, each in our own way. So thank you for listening, and something different from our friend Abarbanel once again for tonight.